Okay, I'm gonna go through how to make sourdough. Are we ready? First thing is you have some starter. Either you've started it yourself, which is not that easy to do, or you've got somebody that's given you starter, and there's my starter. I keep it in this big tub, but you can keep it in something like a mason jar like this. You need a big mixing bowl, and really important, you do need a scale. You can use just cups, that's fine, but I think you get a better, more consistent bread if you use a scale. The other thing is nice to have, don't have to, but is the bread basket, because this is what you proof your bread in, or after you've shaped it, and you're going to let it sit there, and it comes out with those really lovely rings. This piece of bread here has some nice rings. It just looks really nice, very artisan type looking result. And then this helps to have a scraper. It's just this little scraper, and you scrape around the bowl when you're kneading the bread or moving the bread from one vessel to another, and it does help because it really peels it off of the side. A spray bottle, because it's nice to spray into the oven to give a little steam. Then the other thing you need is one of these Dutch ovens to really get the artisan loaf, because it creates steam inside here. So any Dutch oven that you're going to be able to preheat in the oven, and then put your bread in here with the lid. A little slicer, or a lame they call it, L-A-M-E, and this is just really just like a razor blade or X-Acto knife, and you can use that to score your bread. So then it can have a design on it, and it allows the bread to then open at a certain point to vent as it's rising in the oven. So that's a nice thing to have, but definitely an extra. You don't even have to score your bread if you don't want to. Okay, so we're gonna start making some bread, but the first thing we need to do is make sure that the sourdough starter is ready to use. So there's enough activity, the yeast is active enough and ready to go. So I took this starter out of the fridge a couple of hours ago and let it sit, warm up a bit, and I added a half a cup of water, half a cup of whole wheat flour to feed it, and then let it sit again for a little while to see if there's some activity, some bubbles forming and showing that that yeast is eating away at the bread, at the flour, and then it's releasing its gas, so you know it's active and happy. So you can see this starter has a little bit of activity there. There's some bubbles there. And you know, another way to really check that your yeast starter is ready to go is to use the float test. So I've got a cup of water here, it's room temperature. I'm going to take a little bit of the starter here. Let's see, teaspoon, tablespoon. And I'm going to just put it in the water and see if it floats. And if it's floating like that, hey, it's ready to go. And if it doesn't, if it sinks, it just means that there's just more whole wheat flour that hasn't been eaten. There's less yeast in it. It's not quite ready. So you might let that sit for a little while longer. If you haven't fed it, then you would feed it and let it sit for a couple of hours to make sure it comes up. So you'll get to see what it looks like as it's starting to get active, and that yeast is ready to go. I'm going to use my basic Country Loaf Recipe. I've got my scale, place my big bowl on there, and I'm going to use a method of about 70%, 75% moisture liquid to the flour dry. So I'm going to do 1 kilogram of flour. I'm going to do 700 grams of white, 300 grams of whole wheat. You can use any mix you want. It changes if you do more whole wheat. There's more water absorbed, so you might need a little bit more water. But I use my recipe basic is about 700 grams of white flour, 300 grams of whole wheat. So I'm just going to pour it until I get my, really, this is so nice because you don't have to measure, you just throw it in. Okay, I went a little over 700, but that's okay. I'm going to go a little under on this and go to a kilogram, so 1,000 grams. So there we are. I did a little bit too much. go to, yeah, it's perfect. So you get the exact amount every time when you're using a scale like that. So we've got our whole wheat and we've got the white flour there ready to go. Next is simple to have your water and your starter. So again, I'm gonna weigh this, get it to 0 on the scale. I'm gonna use lukewarm water. I think they say it should be 70 degrees, 72 degrees. You can measure it, the books will tell you exactly, but I kind of now know it's about lukewarm. So I'm going to do 700 grams of the water, and I'm going to do 200 grams. Starter just goes in till I get to about 900 grams. It's about 1.5 cups really. So there, I'm exactly at 900 grams. It's pretty much floating. Well, you could have gone a little longer, but it was floating earlier. I mix that up so that's, you know, just easier to incorporate, and then just pour all of that in, and you're gonna notice it's a pretty wet dough. That's okay. It's gonna slowly, the flour is going to absorb that water over time. And the last ingredient that we need to put in here is salt, but I don't put that in until about 20 minutes after this has gotten together, because otherwise you're shocking the yeast too much. You let the water be absorbed into the flour with the yeast, and then like 1/2 hour, sometimes I'll forget and it'll be an hour later, but if you set yourself a timer, it's kind of nice. We're going to put 20 grams of salt into this. So it's fairly wet. I'm just going to leave it like that until the salt, and it needs to be covered. Just these flexible things that can cover it, and that way you don't use plastic wrap. I'm just going to show you how to incorporate the salt. So you mix the flour, the water, and the starter, and you let it sit for 20 minutes at least, maybe a little bit longer. Don't have to be too particular, but you don't want to forget to put the salt in. So I've measured 20 grams of salt in here, and this is our dough. It's again still a little bit wet, but it'll absorb the water as time goes on. So I just sprinkle that on. And then this is when this little scraper comes in handy, or your hand's a little wet. It helps to then sort of scrape around to get it off of the bottom of the bowl, and making sure the salt is just on there. And then once it's come off the bowl, I'm just gonna again use that technique of stretch and fold. Stretch, now it's becoming elastic actually. Stretch and fold, and you'll feel the grains of the salt in your hand. And then as you keep doing this, you'll start to realize, oh, I don't feel those grains anymore. They're being absorbed into the dough. And so that's when you know that you're probably fine. I'm gonna continue. In an hour, you're gonna do another knead, so the salt will, you know, eventually get totally incorporated into it. But I'm sort of kneading it. This is my hardest knead because I'm trying to get the salt mixed in. The other times I do it, I would do it for less time, and I would do it a little more gently. And that's where this bread is almost like, in the end, it's really not much of a knead. So there it goes, salt's in, it's ready to go back, covered up, put back into a warm area, and I love to use my oven that's just got a light on, let it sit in there, and it gets just the right temperature, about 80 degrees in there, to then allow the yeast to start growing and start doing its magic and rising up that dough. And it's about time now to start to do our first knead. So after you get it all mixed up, the salt's in there, it's gonna sit and rise for about 4 hours. And ideally every hour or so you should turn it and very loosely knead it. But again, sometimes I forget to do that, and I ended up only kneading it a couple of times. You peel it up off the bottom, and this is where if you can't quite get it, your scraper might come in handy. And you just sort of pull it out and you fold it. So it's not really kneading, it's more of a fold. And I'm gonna pull it out, and I'm gonna fold it, and I'm gonna pull, and do this about 4 or 5 times, and just sort of folding it. Now that's probably enough for that first turn. Back covered, back into that nice proofing area. And over time, this is gonna sort of warm, and it's gonna start to rise, and it's gonna double in size. But that's the first stage of getting your dough ready to proof. Hi everybody. I've just taken this out of the proofing oven, which is where it's been sitting for about 2.5 hours since I mixed it all together and put the salt in it. So it's coming up, it's rising up, and it's got a nice kind of, it's not quite there yet, but it's time to give it a turn or a knead. So I do have my trusty little tool, but I don't think I need it. I think I can use my hand. And I just kind of scooch it around the underside of it and pull up a little, and you can see that it will give a stretch. The gluten's forming there, and I stretch and pull it over in the bowl. That's a couple of times. That's 2, 3, and I'm just making kind of a circle. Turn, take the next one up, stretch a bit, and push it over. And I'll just do another one, and that'll be that. That's enough, just enough to kind of just get it a little turned, a little mixed. It's gonna go back in the proofing oven, and it's probably got another 1.5 hours, so maybe 2 hours, so 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours total, and it should be actually quite high by then. And then it'll be time to shape it, put it in the baskets, and then I put it in the fridge overnight, and I'll bake it in the morning. Okay, here we go again for almost the final step, not quite, but we're going to, our dough is now risen. It's been about 4 or 5 hours, and it really has come up to double the size, and you can see that yeast and everything. It's kind of jelly-like, looks good. And we're going to dump this out, we're going to shape it, and we're going to put it into these 2 baskets. That will sit and proof. I'm going to proof it overnight. Anyways, this is the stage where in our baskets I use rice flour, which is recommended because it really doesn't stick. So I just put a little bit in each, and there's some leftover rice flour from before. Rice flour, it really doesn't stick. If you put regular flour, you'd have to use quite a bit. And if you leave it overnight, it can get moist and it can kind of stick to it as well. So I am going to just take this out of here. This is where this scraper comes in handy. You can do it with your hand, but it kind of comes off the bowl fairly easily with that onto a floured surface. All done. You can let that rest for a little while, but I'm going to go ahead and make it shape it into the basket. So a little bit of flour. I've got something to cut it. I've just got this here, but you can use a knife, but you just want to basically cut it into 2 and separate it out. It's still fairly sticky here, so I'm going to use a little bit of flour in my hands, and we'll work one at a time. And I'm going to do this one first into the larger basket here. So it looks like I cut it a little bigger here. And again, same technique is you fold it over. It's quite elasticy right now. And I'm going to just start by going one side, then the other. Sometimes the scraper helps to kind of lift it up, place it down, and then I'm going to do the final side. And you use as much flour as you need, not a lot, but just a little bit, and bring it around. So I'm going to work in a circle, just bringing that around, pushes a little bit of the gas out, takes a little, we're bringing it around and around on the floured surface. So I'm almost making a belly button in the middle here, what looks like a belly button. It's just folding into the middle. Then it gets to the point where you feel like you've got a nice round edge on this side. And you can see it's fairly round. And that's about time where I will now just pull it along the counter to make a nice firm surface there, stretches it, makes it nice and round there. So we're going to pull it around. It's still creating this sort of belly button on the underside. And after doing that a few times and you made it into your nice round shape, I'm going to place it into this basket. I'm going to place it in with the belly button side down, and it'll be nice and smooth on the top, because when I turn it over after to put it into the oven, I want that belly button side to kind of be facing up, because that's where the bread's just going to go open, and as it starts to cook and rise and crack open, you're going to get nice cracks with that side. I think that's why goes in that way. It seems to work better. cover that with wrap, and that's going to go into the fridge. And this one is a little different shape, so as I'm doing my regular, start one side, two sides, three sides, and by the time you get to the fourth, you can sort of start to move it around. Just like that, it's going to go into the fridge. It will rise a little bit overnight, probably to the top of here, and in the morning I'll take that out. Morning! It's time now to bake our bread. So I preheated the oven to 460 degrees, and I put my 2 Dutch ovens in there to preheat with the lids on. And the other thing I've done is I put a tray in the bottom with water in it. So that gives it a little bit more moisture in a traditional oven. It's not on convection, it's just a regular electric oven. So here's our bread that came out of the fridge. It went in, as you remember, and it wasn't quite as high. It's risen overnight a little bit, slowly developed. The fridge kind of retards the development. If I left it on the counter all night, it would be bigger and it probably would be a soupy mess. So you definitely, if you're gonna leave it out a long time, you put it in the fridge, it'll slow down the process. So this is looking really kind of nice. It's got a little bouncy feel to it, and a nice skin on it. So I use parchment paper because it's really easy to lift that parchment into the hot Dutch oven. Some people will just tip their bread basket into the Dutch oven, but this is, I think, a safer way to do it. So I'm going to have put these both on my parchment. So I just flip her on over, and then I lift off the bread basket. Sometimes it's a little bit sticky. I use my fingers underneath to kind of let the weight of it take it naturally, not really pulling, but just letting it happen very gradually, and it comes off like that beautifully. And then the other one, sometimes it just falls right out, but sometimes it does take a little bit of time to let it come out naturally. So we've got these beautiful loaves now with nice rings from the proofing basket. And here I've got my trusty lathe, my sharp razor blade, and I'm going to score these. Remember, these have sort of that belly button now is facing up, so if I were to just put in the oven, it would just open and crust open where naturally the seams are, but I'm going to give it a little bit of a design and see if the venting then will be on these scores. So I've got one that way. I'll just do another one like that. There's an A for Anne. You can be creative, you can do little branches, whatever you like to do. So we've got it ready to go in the oven, and so I'll open the oven. It's hot, 460 degrees. Take it out partially here. I've got my 2 Dutch ovens I'm going to use today. Here's my one. First loaf's going to go in. That way I'm not burning my fingers. I usually just take a bit of spray and spray the inside of the lid before popping it on there very quickly, and then gives it a little bit of moisture. But the Dutch oven sealed like that gives it quite a bit of moisture. Here's my tray. It's got some water in it, so I'll leave it. Now shut it at 460, 30 minutes, and don't even look at it. And then after 30 minutes, we're going to take off the lids and leave it in there for another 15 to brown. Now we're at the stage where it's partially cooked. We want to take the lids off and let the top of the bread brown. So this is kind of a fun unveil. You can see where it cracks open, and this is a time when I might add some more water as well to my pan. So pull those things out and boom! Okay, it's starting to look really nice. starting to brown a bit, and that one's come up quite nice too. It's kind of cracked open in its nice spot. I'm going to put those back. I just sort of trim a little, put a little bit more water. If I spill it on the bottom, well, I'm not sure it's good for my oven, but it steams it up quite nicely, and that's good for the bread. And then I'm going to do 15 minutes more at 460, and then it'll be brown and done. So you don't really have to touch it or do anything else to it. It'll come out beautifully, and we'll take it out of the pan. Okay, we're ready for the bread to come out of the oven. It's been on for 30 minutes with the lid on, 15 with the lid off. It's beeping. So, it's good to set a timer, because you never know when you get distracted, which I do. It's still steaming, which is nice to sort of see. There's the first loaf. There's my A. Doesn't look like an A anymore, but pretty good. There we go. And then what I do is I just usually take it out and put it onto, I usually put it onto a rack. My stove has a nice rack, rather than straight onto a counter, because then it will cool and it won't get steamy underneath. It'll crisp up nicely on the bottom. Artisan with your own starter. It feels like a real sense of accomplishment. Good luck to you!
Shishito peppers.
Sprouting.